Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into something pretty powerful today. Erich Maria Remarque's All Quiet on the Western Front.
A classic for sure.
Definitely. And today we're not just talking about the story itself, but also how AI tools, like Google's NotebookLM, can give us a new way to look at it.
Oh, I'm really interested to see how NotebookLM can add to our understanding here. It's like having, well, a research assistant and a literary critic all in one.
Exactly. It can pull out these complex themes, link them to history, even compare the novel to other works. I'm curious how it'll help us unpack some of the less talked about stuff, like Remarque's actual writing style and, its impact historically.
One thing that always hits me about Remarque is how he gets that psychological impact of war across. He doesn't
Okay.
shy away from the brutality, but he also shows these subtle ways the soldiers' minds, their souls even, are affected.
It really goes beyond just the physical horrors. It's like this emotional and existential crisis they face.
Exactly. And maybe just defining the existential crisis might be helpful for some listeners. Essentially, it's, questioning your purpose, your place in the universe. That feeling of meaninglessness that can come when you're facing something like the horrors of war.
And Remarques doesn't just tell us, right? He makes us feel it. It's in the imagery, those sensory details, even how his sentences flow. It all creates this immersive experience.
I totally agree. Think about that scene where Paul is stuck in the shell hole with the French soldier he just killed. The way Remarque describes it, it's so visceral, so raw, you almost feel like you're right there with Paul.
Oh, absolutely. That's one where Notebook LM could really come in. Imagine if it could pull up similar passages from other war novels, ones dealing with, say, guilt, trauma, or how the enemy is dehumanized.
You could even analyze how Remarque's language in that scene adds to that feeling of despair and disillusionment. Like the use of those short, choppy sentences for the violence, and then longer, more thoughtful ones for Paul's internal struggle.
Okay, but before we go too deep on Notebook LM, let's step back to Remarque himself for a second. This wasn't just some writer, making up a war story. He was in World War I, and that definitely shaped his view.
For sure. His goal with All Quiet on the Western Front wasn't to glorify war or romanticize it. It was to expose what it was really like, strip away those heroic illusions, and show the true cost.
And he did. The way he depicts trench warfare, the friendships between soldiers, the psychological impact.
And he wasn't alone in that. There was a whole generation of artists and writers after the war, deeply affected. They call themselves the Lost Generation. And their work really reflects that disillusionment, that struggle to make sense of a world broken by conflict.
Which is exactly why All Quiet on the Western Front wasn't just popular, it was a phenomenon. It caused controversy, got banned in some places, but it made people confront the human cost of war.
And that's where its power lies, I think. It goes beyond the history and speaks to something universal about war. Whether it's World War I, II, or even today's conflicts, those themes of loss, camaraderie, the impact of violence, they still resonate.
Makes you wonder how the book would have been received if it had, say, Notebook LM back then. Wider audience, more debate.
That's a fascinating thought. Imagine the AI generating summaries in different languages, linking the novel to current events, even personalizing the reading experience. The possibilities are pretty intriguing.
It's like stepping into this new era of engaging with books where AI can help us bridge the past and present different cultures.
And that's why I'm excited to look at All Quiet on the Western Front through this lens. I think it can unlock new layers of meaning, even for those who've read it before.
I totally agree. But let's get back to the book for a bit. One of the most striking parts of All Quiet on the Western Front is how it portrays this loss of innocence.
You see it most clearly in Paul Boymer. He starts out as this idealistic young man full of dreams. But war, well, he goes through a huge transformation. Unspeakable violence, losing friends, confronting death itself, all before he's even an adult.
It's heartbreaking to see how war just strips away his youthful idealism. It leaves him disillusioned and scarred. And it's not just Paul. This feeling is all over the novel.
Yeah, it's in how the soldiers cling to little comforts, letters from home, memories, trying to hold on to who they were before.
But I think many readers can relate to that feeling, even without war. Looking back on a simpler time, realizing you can never really go back.
That bittersweet nostalgia mixed with knowing how much you've changed, how much the world has changed.
And I wonder if Notebook LM could help us unpack this theme even more. Could it analyze how Remarque describes Paul's change, compare it to other coming-of-age stories set during war?
It could even connect the novel to, say, psychological studies on trauma or veteran stories.
That would be amazing. To see this timeless theme in different contexts.
And that's what makes this exploration so exciting. It's not just one novel, but using AI to connect literature to history, to psychology, to ourselves.
Absolutely. It's a powerful combination.
It's funny you mentioned current events, because one of the things All Quiet on the Western Front does so well is highlight how pointless war is.
Oh, totally.
R-
Even though the battles, the technology, it's all different today, that feeling that it's all for nothing, the loss of life, it goes beyond time.
Exactly. Remarque really hits you with this, showing how absurd war is. Pointless orders, the constant threat, the way lives just become numbers.
It makes me think of that scene where Paul's on leave, trying to reconnect with everyone back home. He just can't get them to understand what he's been through.
Yeah, such a powerful example of how soldiers feel coming back. It's like they've seen hell, but no one gets it.
And I think this is another spot where Notebook LM could really come in. Imagine comparing Paul's experience to, say, writings from veterans of other wars.
Or even to soldiers today struggling with PTSD.
Mhm.
That'd be incredible to see how that isolation, that feeling of being alone, it's the same across time and place.
And it could help us see how we've, or haven't, gotten better at supporting veterans. Has the stigma around mental health changed? Are there better resources? Things like that.
That's a great point. And speaking of connections, it's interesting to compare All Quiet on the Western Front with Catch-22, like we touched on before. They both show how absurd war is, but in different ways.
Yeah, how would you say those ways differ?
Well, All Quiet is very grounded in the reality. It's about what it feels like to be there, the horrors they face day to day. Catch-22, though, uses satire, dark humor to point out the madness, the illogical side of war.
It's like two sides of the same coin, right? One shows the brutal reality, the other shows the system that keeps that reality going.
Precisely. And Notebook LM could be fascinating here. Imagine analyzing how Remarque and Heller use language, their word choices, imagery, tone. How does all that create the impact of their novels?
That'd be awesome to see how writing styles can explore similar themes so differently. I wonder, could Notebook LM even compare the cultural impact of both books?
I bet it could. Imagine it. It could analyze how All Quiet impacted the anti-war movement in the 30s, or how Catch-22 connected with the counterculture in the 60s, and how they've been adapted into movies, plays over time.
There's so many possibilities. It's like
Yeah.
tracing how these stories spread out, how they've shaped how we see war.
It's a whole new way of looking at literature. It's not just reading. It's exploring the connections, the history, the impact. AI can help us do that.
It's exciting. But before we get lost in the tech, I want to circle back to something you said earlier, how Remarque makes you feel the war.
Right. And one of the ways he does that is sensory details. He doesn't just say mud and blood. He describes the smell of decay, the taste of fear, the sounds.
It pulls you right in there with them.
It's on purpose to create this physical reaction in you, to break down that wall between the book and your imagination.
I remember that part where Paul talks about the rats, fat, fearless, eating the bodies. Just a small detail, but it adds so much to the horror.
Exactly. He uses these everyday things to create unease. And what's even more disturbing is how the soldiers become almost numb to it, surrounded by death, but they have to keep going.
Like a coping mechanism, right? Shutting down emotions to deal with the constant threat.
Exactly. And I think that connects with people even outside of war. We all have our ways of dealing with trauma, grief, anxiety. Some shut down, some lash out, some find comfort in art, nature.
I wonder if Notebook LM could analyze those coping mechanisms, compare how characters in different novels from different times face similar things.
Good point. And it wouldn't just be books. It could look at psych studies, history, even sociology,
Yeah.
to build a bigger picture of how humans have dealt with trauma and resilience.
This is making me realize just how much Notebook LM could do, not just for books, but for understanding ourselves, the world.
I agree. And that's what makes this whole thing with All Quiet on the Western Front so interesting. It's not about taking apart a novel. It's about using AI to understand what it means to be human.
And speaking of being human, one thing Remarque captures so well is the relationships between the soldiers. It's not just about the horrors, but the friendships, the humor, the little kindnesses that help them survive.
Yes, the camaraderie is so important.
Yeah.
It's their hope. It keeps them going in all that suffering.
I love Paul and Kat's relationship, Stanislaus Kaczynski, but they call him Kat. He's like this wise older brother teaching Paul how to survive, being there for him.
Their bond is beautiful and so sad knowing Kat doesn't make it.
When Paul carries Kat's body after he's shot, one of the most powerful moments in the book, it's like he loses a part of himself.
It really shows the power of friendship and the impact of loss. And this is another place where Notebook LM could be great.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine analyzing their conversations, comparing their relationship to other stories about wartime friendships.
That'd be amazing to see those dynamics in different stories, cultures, times. It could give us a new view on how we connect, even in the darkest places.
And it can show how those connections are both strength and pain, especially when you know loss is coming.
It's interesting you say that about loss being inevitable, because one thing that hit me rereading this is how much it focuses on disillusionment. Not just losing innocence, but those big ideas we use to make sense of the world just getting shattered.
I see what you mean, that they start with these ideals, right? Patriotism, glory, heroism. But war just tears those apart, leaves them empty, cynical.
Exactly, like they were lied to, and the reality is so much worse, so pointless.
And it goes beyond the fighting, too. When Paul's home, even his family, they don't get it. They're still holding on to those old ideas while he's seeing the truth.
It isolates him, like he's stuck between two worlds, doesn't fit in his old life anymore, but can't find a place in this new one.
That's a timeless feeling, I think. Even today, veterans struggle going back to civilian life, dealing with the trauma, the disillusionment.
Makes you think, how can we, as a society, do better for them? How do we bridge that gap between those who've seen war and those who haven't?
It's tough. No easy answers. But part of it's got to be listening to their stories, acknowledging the pain, the loss, and challenging those ideas that make war seem glorious, hiding the real cost.
And books like All Quiet on the Western Front, they're vital for that. Giving a voice to those experiences forces us to see war for what it is, a tragedy, not an adventure.
And NotebookLM could be a huge help there for teachers, therapists, even people making policy. Imagine using AI to connect the novel to things like PTSD, veteran suicide, the tough choices in modern war.
It could help people understand the impact war has long after it's over,
Yeah.
and hopefully lead to more compassion, more effective help for those who served.
And it wouldn't have to stop with this book. Imagine a whole network of resources, like you said, using literature, history, psychology, all connected, giving us a deeper understanding of war.
That would be incredible. A digital archive of human experience, learning from the past, dealing with now, and maybe building a more peaceful future.
And it all starts with engaging with these stories, asking questions, challenging what we think we know.
So as we wrap up our deep dive on All Quiet on the Western Front, what's one thing you hope our listeners take away from this?
What keeps sticking with me is how Remarque shows beauty in nature. Even with all the destruction around the trenches, even there, the soldiers find peace in a sunset. Birds singing, the smell of flowers.
Like even in the darkest times, there's still hope, beauty to be found.
Exactly. And that's powerful, not just for this book, but for our own lives. To remember, even with the chaos, there's always something worth fighting for, something worth holding on to.
Beautifully said. And to everyone listening, we encourage you to pick up All Quiet on the Western Front. Let its message hit home, and maybe even try out NotebookLM while you're reading. Might surprise you what you find.
And remember, this isn't the end. Keep thinking, keep questioning, and keep working for a world where peace wins.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time for another exploration. Until then, keep learning, keep exploring, and keep the conversation going.